It's pretty amazing how our understanding of a famous text can be totally shaped by ignoring the sentences right next to it. In this explainer, we're diving into a well-known Quranic verse on polygyny, but we're going to do something simple. We're going to look at its neighbors. We'll explore a source analysis that suggests this one little shift, well, it might just change everything.
So here it is, Surah An-Nisa, verse 3. This is the verse, the one at the very center of the whole conversation around polygyny in Islam. And, on the surface, it seems pretty straightforward. You can marry 2, 3, or 4 women, but, and this is a big but, there's this huge condition attached. You have to be just.
And that immediately brings up the big question, right? What is this verse actually doing? Is it laying down a rule? Is it creating a rare exception? Well, the analysis we're exploring today argues for a third option, that maybe, just maybe, this verse isn't really about setting rules for polygyny at all. Let's dig into that. Okay, so before we get to this new reading, we've got to understand the common one. It's the one most people are familiar with, and it's built on a few really key assumptions about what this verse is trying to do. The modern view pretty much rests on these 3 big ideas. First, that monogamy is the default, the standard. Second, that this verse is the moment the Quran actually introduces the practice of polygyny. And third, that it specifically connects that permission to the idea of caring for orphan girls. So when you put all that together in this common reading, the verse starts to look like a kind of social welfare provision. It's allowing a man to step outside the monogamous norm, but for a very specific reason, to take care of orphan girls who might not have anyone else. All right, now for the big pivot. The core of this new analysis argues that the real meaning is hiding in plain sight. It's not found by isolating this verse, but by reading what comes right before and right after. The key, as they say, is context. And here's the moment that changes everything. The source asks this fundamental question. What if that phrase, fear of not dealing justly with orphan girls, has nothing to do with finding them husbands? What if it's all about protecting their money? And boom, look at the verse that comes directly before the one about marriage. Verse 4:2 is crystal clear, and it's all about one thing, the financial rights of orphans. It's a stark warning to their guardians, don't you dare touch their property. The theme here is undeniably about wealth. You see how this context just flips the meaning of fear of injustice on its head? The common view sees a social problem. Oh no, who will marry these orphans? But the contextual reading sees a financial temptation. How do we stop guardians from stealing an orphan girl's inheritance? This completely reframes the verse's command. It's no longer about permitting polygyny to solve an orphan crisis. No. Instead, it's a warning to guardians who might be tempted by their ward's wealth. It's saying, hey, don't marry her just to get your hands on her money. If you want to marry other women. Polygyny is an option that already exists, so choose that instead of committing financial fraud. And the financial theme doesn't stop there. The verse that comes right after our key verse, 4:4, is about what? Paying women their bridal gifts, their ma. So you've got this sandwich, a verse on orphan property, then our verse, then a verse on bridal gifts. It's a clear, unbroken financial thread. Okay, so to really pressure test the common interpretation, the source proposes a little logical exercise. It says, all right, let's take their premise at face value. If the permission to marry 2, 3, or 4 is only about marrying orphan girls, what happens if we apply that logic to the whole verse consistently? And this is where that logic just kind of falls apart, because the verse goes on to say, but if you fear you will not be just, then marry only one. Well, if the orphan condition applies to the whole thing, then that would mean monogamous men could only marry orphans too. And since that's a pretty illogical conclusion, it suggests the original idea that the verse is only about marrying orphans is probably flawed. All right, let's switch gears and tackle the second major pillar of this whole discussion, that all-important condition of justice. There's another verse in this very same chapter that seems to create a flat-out contradiction, and it's often used to argue that polygyny is basically impossible in practice. Here they are, side by side. Verse 3 makes justice a non-negotiable condition for having more than one wife. But then, later on in verse 129, it seems to say that achieving that justice is impossible. So the common argument goes, if you can never be just, then the condition can never be met, and therefore polygyny is forbidden. Makes sense, right? But hold on. Once again, the key is the immediate context. What does the verse right before this impossible justice statement talk about? It describes a very specific marital problem. A wife is afraid her husband is neglecting her, and the couple is told to try and negotiate a settlement to save the marriage. This whole passage is basically a practical guide for conflict resolution. It's outlining a process for when things go south in a marriage. A husband's feelings might have changed, and the couple tries to renegotiate things, like financial support or how much time they spend together, to try and avoid a divorce. So when you read it in this very specific context, a tense, emotional negotiation, that phrase, "you will never be able to be just," takes on a whole new meaning. The argument is that it's not some universal law banning polygyny. It's a realistic, almost psychological warning that, hey, during a painful negotiation, trying to find a settlement that feels perfectly fair to a wife who feels neglected, yeah, that's going to be pretty much impossible. So after going through all of that, where does this contextual reading leave us? Well, it fundamentally reframes the entire discussion. The focus shifts dramatically away from regulating marriage and lands squarely on protecting women's financial rights. Let's just summarize the two views to make it super clear. The common interpretation sees the main topic here as marriage regulation. It treats polygyny as a new exception that needs to be limited. The contextual reading, on the other hand, sees the primary topic as wealth regulation. It treats polygyny as an existing social norm that desperately needs financial justice applied within it. To put it as plainly as possible, the core thesis is this. These verses are not creating or limiting the practice of polygyny. They are stepping into a society where polygyny was already common, and they're working to fix very specific financial injustices happening to women and orphans within that system. And this quote from the source really drives home the historical argument. It says the Quran talks about marriage in these terms for a simple reason. That's just how marriage worked at the time. Polygyny was the social reality. The text was addressing the world as it actually was, not inventing a whole new system from scratch. And that, right there, is the ultimate takeaway. Whether the specific issue is an orphan's inheritance, a wife's bridal gift, or a difficult marital settlement, the consistent underlying theme, the drumbeat of this entire passage, is the protection of women's financial security. So this whole analysis leaves us with a much bigger question, one that goes way beyond this single topic. How much of our modern understanding of ancient texts is shaped by verses that we've lifted out and read in isolation? It's a powerful question to think about, no matter what text you happen to be reading.